This is Taylor Mason. I'm here today with Representative Stephen Kinsey. This is an ongoing oral history project on the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus and its impact on members and staff. Thank you so much for taking time today to do this interview.
It's my pleasure, Taylor.
So why don't you start by telling me a little bit about yourself and how you got to the Pennsylvania House of Representatives?
Sure. You know, Taylor, for me, it's just a regular kid from the Germantown section of Philadelphia. Attended public schools, went to college, went and got an MBA, got married, had kids. And so I guess living a typical life. But one of the things that I recognize is that I worked in nonprofit for the most part. And I recognized that these nonprofit organizations were dependent upon getting grants from the state and the feds. So, from working with people with disabilities to doing job training, each of those industries depended upon state funding. So, at one of the jobs that I had with the workforce development piece, the job training, we hit a period of time where the funding wasn't coming in. And of course, that impacted my ability to provide for my children. And it just dawned on me that, maybe, just maybe I need to be on the other side of the table as a state legislator and help to provide these nonprofit agencies with the funding that's necessary. So that was a part of what really thrust me. But I have to also say this, though. As a young kid, there was a gentleman, and I guess we'll talk about him later on, but his name happened to be David P. Richardson Jr. And I grew up at a time where gang war was somewhat prevalent in Philadelphia, and even in the northwest section where I reside. But one thing that was consistent was this guy named David P. Richardson, who would walk in any community in Germantown, would talk to us young guys about what we're doing and talk about our future. And Dave was like this Paul Bunyan guy. So so for me, working in the nonprofit industry was one piece, but the other side of it was, admiring this gentleman by the name of David P. Richardson Jr. And I think those two experiences, even though they happened at different parts of my life, but I think they got me on a continuum of saying, you know what, I need to serve as a state legislator.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So what has been your experience being a person of color in the House? Do you believe you've had extra hurdles in running for public office? Do you think that has impacted your service? Any stories you'd like to share regarding that topic?
Sure. I don't want to say I had extra hurdles. I mean, typically I can say, yeah, being black in and of itself creates extra hurdles. And that's true. I mean, I went to Westchester University as an undergrad during the late 70s. And even though I had a great experiences, there were some situations where there were racial incidents involving me directly. And again, the racial incidents simply happened because I happened to be a black young man at a predominantly white university. But in addition to that, I recognize that getting elected, coming from an area of a population which was predominantly African American, we knew that there would be someone of color coming out of that particular seat. Getting up here, and seeing 203 members in the House, and then just seeing a small handful. I think at the time when I arrived, might have been maybe 19 or 20 members who were African American. We were in our 20s, but coming up here and seeing this as first of all, I came up here as a staffer for John Myers. I served as John Myers' chief of staff, and then of course ran for the seat and came up here permanently as a member. There are some hurdles, and what you recognize is that the majority rules, and the Republicans were the majority, but then also when I initially came in, there were no black Republicans. So, the majority was one of a different color than I am, and then two, they're of a different party. So it was almost like putting me in a hole. I don't want to say in a hole, but it was like a double hill to climb, so to speak. And but politics is about relationships, and regardless of one's skin color or regardless of one's party affiliation, you learn to have conversation. You find a way to build bridges. Any individual decide whether or not they want to cross those bridges, but I think for me, and looking to try to get the work done to represent the people that sent me here, I recognized it was necessary for me to cross those bridges, and I did that when I first came up here, and I continue to do that today.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. So you represent the 201st Legislative District, which is in Philadelphia. Could you just share a little bit about your district, what it's like, what type of people there, what their issues are, or do they have any specific things you'd like to share?
Yeah. Germantown is really a historic community. And when I say historic, I'm talking about we have quite a few of the historic homes. And I mean, these are homes that go back into the 1700s. The Cliveden House, the Johnson House, which was part of the Underground Railroad. You know, we have the whole historic Germantown right there in the community in which I grew up in. So it's nice to have these historic homes that talk about the future and you know, generations of past. However, also Germantown was a diverse community, and it was interesting because I recall my family moving there in 1963. I was a young kid, and I grew up playing with Mary Beth and Charlotte. And then one day, Mary Beth and Charlotte moved. And I share this story because for me it was the beginning of what they call white flight. Mm-hmm. And Mary Beth and Charlotte were two white girls who were a doorway from where my family moved into. And, you know, when we moved in this neighborhood, we weren't the first black family, but we were one of the first black families to move in this neighborhood. And you start seeing folks move out of the neighborhood. You know, I can count on my hands as I continue to grow the number of non-blacks that lived in my community. But Germantown and other sections of it, I mean, it was still a diverse community, and it still is to this day a diverse community. And it's a community where we embrace each other. You know, the Quakers really were settled in the Germantown section of Philadelphia. And if you know anything about the Quaker history, I mean, the Quaker histories were individuals and families who attempted to work with other racial groups to try to support other racial groups, even attempted to protect blacks throughout periods of time. Mm-hmm. And so to have those folks settle in the Germantown section, for me to live in the Germantown section, and really just to see the beauty and the historic artifacts that were there, I mean, that sort of helped me to make me the person that I am today. Someone who respects diversity, someone who works in a diverse environment, and someone who just cares about other people, period. So that's the community that I represent today, Germantown.
Yeah, okay. Speaking of your district, you have a very historic line of predecessors, as you mentioned and hinted earlier. What was your relationship with your predecessors, and did they play a mentor role for you, or if you feel free to share any stories about them that you can think of?
Sure. You know, I share this one story. As a gentleman, his name was Mr. Morley, and I was a little kid at the time. I mean, like 6, 7, 8, 9. But Mr. Morley was a gentleman who lived right around the corner from my house. He lived on Sherman Street. He lived on Duval Street. Mr. Morley was a tall, thin white man, always wore a bow tie and a straw hat. And as a kid, you know, I mean, we stereotype like anybody else do. I always thought that Mr. Morley was an attorney, mm-hmm. and a Republican attorney because of the colors that he used to wear. But I always thought he was just an attorney, and I really didn't know the difference between Democrat and Republican. But as I got older, I just thought that Mr. Morley was a Republican attorney. He always spoke nice. But he was also someone who cared about the kids in the community, and we used to go over his house and sit down and talk with Mr. Morley, and Mr. Morley used to go in and get out a box of Good and Plenty or Good and Fruity and just hand them out as we were sitting there talking. And he would talk about community. Lo did I know that Mr. Morley was actually the state representative. And I'm not sure if it was the 201st Legislative District at the time, but he passed away. And it wasn't until I ran for office that his daughter informed me that Daddy would be proud of me, and I just didn't know why her daddy would be proud of me, and that's when she informed me that her daddy was the state representative. Mm-hmm. And that was before, I think, the constitutional amendment or constitutional change. But so here it is, you know, I got to meet the state representative at an early age and not even knew that he was a state rep. But, you know, again, his behavior was such an impact to our community because, again, it was that diversity and that richness and just that caring for others and taking time to talk to each other that was instilled at a young age. As I continued to grow, and you know, by this time I'm in middle school and then heading towards high school, but there was a guy named David P. Richardson Jr., and everybody talked about this guy, David P. Richardson Jr., and David P. Richardson Jr. was going to run for the state rep seat, but he wasn't running as a Democrat. He's running as an independent. And again, this is jargon as a young kid. You don't know. You just know that he's running for office, and you see the statue of a man. He's like 6'3", had a baritone voice, but he was friendly. So it was like a Paul Bunyan type guy. The guy was big as life, but yet as gentle, like the gentle giant. And Dave was the kind of guy who would just walk through neighborhoods, talk to the kids. Hey guys, what you guys doing? And then talk about what we're doing. And again, this was during the time of when Philadelphia was dealing with, sometimes they called it gang war or just, territorial boundaries. But Dave was the kind of guy that walked in every area of Philadelphia and really truly beyond, as we got to know much more about Dave. But Dave was a guy that I looked up to. And I remember graduating from high school, and Dave was a state rep, and we were just proud because Dave went to the same high school that I went to. So we're very proud of that. And I recall even having a high school reunion, and David P. Richardson, I have a picture of David P. Richardson and myself and another gentleman from high school with me. And we presented David P. Richardson with the Germantown 76 Community Service Award. So I got this picture, and like I said, had no idea at that time that this guy who I was presenting this award to, I would one day sit in his chair. But David was truly an inspiration for me as I was growing up. And it's because how he treated people and the respect that people had for him, but also the fact that Dave was working to make a difference throughout my community, and everybody knew of David P. Richardson Jr. So that was an inspiration for me. And of course, unfortunately, Dave died in 1995. None of us were expecting it. Dave was only in his 40s when he died, and none of us were expecting it. But it was truly a sad period of time for folks throughout the Germantown community. And again, I wasn't involved in politics, but, then it's named John Myers. John Myers, he's part of Dave Richardson's crew. And folks were saying John Myers was going to be the next state representative. And I knew of John Myers, didn't necessarily know him personally at the time, but I knew of John Myers. And, of course, John became the next state rep for the 201st Legislative District. And by this time, I'm now starting to work with nonprofits in the community. So, of course, I'm starting to see John Myers around, and and there was the following wasn't as large as what Dave had, but again, John and Dave had a very good relationship. So some of those same folks I would see with Dave Richardson, we would start seeing it with John Myers, and John was very close with the councilwoman Donna Reed Miller. In fact, she at one point worked for David P. Richardson Jr. But then the boss that I worked for at the nonprofit. He had a special relationship with John Myers. So, of course, I started seeing John more frequently. And, we got to know each other and started having a little small conversation. And, again, didn't know him personally, but, just respected the work that John Myers was trying to do. John had his own style, Dave had his own style. So, I keep that in mind because these are two separate individuals, but both trying to do the work of people throughout the northwest section of Philadelphia. So somewhere down the road, as my nonprofit was hitting some hard times, I remember having a conversation with my executive director about my future. And during the conversation, I shared with him that, struggling a little bit, I'm raising 3 daughters as a single dad and, really need to be consistent with my pay. And I was looking for other options. And throughout this conversation, he asked me what my 3 options were. And I told him, since I had my MBA, I said I was either looking to replace him as the executive director of the nonprofit. I knew that wasn't going to work, but still had to put it out there because that was my feeling. The other thing was I talked about starting my own consultant business. You get this MBA, you think you have this piece of paper and you're on top of the world. So I talked about that. And then the third thing I talked about was getting involved in politics. And I remember he asked me, were you interested in city politics or state politics? And I said state politics because of David P. Richardson. I saw the impact that David P. Richardson had. So he picked up the phone and he called John Myers, State Representative John Myers, and said, hey, John, you know Steve Kinsey? John said, yeah, I know Steve. He said, well, Steve's interested in politics, and I thought maybe he could work with you. And John Myers, I'll never forget this. John Myers said, man, I already got somebody I'm training. And, John had a baritone voice also, so it comes through really clear, even though I think it might have been a speakerphone, but I'm hearing this, and it's like, and I don't know what prompted me, but I just made a comment and said, well, I guess I'll just have to run against that person. And John Myers said, what? And the phone hung up. And I was like, oh, God, I just insulted the state rep. And my boss just turned to me and he started laughing. He says, oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. But I was worried about it because, I had a state rep just hang up the phone. Like, did I have a target on my back now? I wasn't sure what was going to happen. But a few weeks later, John Myers actually called me and said, yeah, boy, you want to learn this? I said, yes, sir. And he said, okay, going to have you work on my campaign. And, of course, I'm like, I don't know nothing about campaigns. And he says, well, we're not going to talk right now anyway. You're at work. He said, but we'll talk later. And so that's really how I got thrusted into really learning about this. I took some time off and I went to work on John Myers' campaign. The crazy thing is he was unopposed. But John Myers was such a soldier that even though he was unopposed, we still went through the motions of everything as though he was running an active campaign. And I used to say to him, well, nobody's running against you. And he's like, you never know. You always got to be prepared. It's almost like a drill sergeant. And that's how John was. So for at least 3 months, we went through this process of running an active campaign against nobody. But that was John Myers' way. That was just his character. And, you don't appreciate it until you're able to understand it. So while I'm going through it, I'm like, this guy's crazy, man. I mean, like, we're not running against nobody. We're meeting with folks, and oh my goodness, man, my Saturdays were. I volunteered for this, But yeah, it was a commitment. And after the election was over, and John went unopposed, 6 months later, he called me and said to me, okay, you want to do this? Come work for me. And it was a total shock because I just wasn't expecting it. And, we had our conversation. And I have to tell you this. I took a $22,000 pay cut to work for John Myers.
Wow.
I took a $22,000 pay cut thinking that I'd have the opportunities to work on weekends to provide for my family. And, but it was, hey, I'm now an employee of the state, great benefits, I'll get paid regularly. So I had to balance those things. And when I had that conversation with John, and told him I took a $22,000 pay cut thinking that he'd be sympathetic towards it or maybe try to give me an increase. And when I saw no increase was coming, I said, well, I'm going to work on weekends. And John Myers said to me, you can't do that. I said, what do you mean I can't do that? He said, you want to be a state rep. You can't work on weekends. This job is 24/7. And I said, but you're the state rep. And John Myers said, but you want to be the state rep, so you better practice now. I don't want to tell you about my struggles, but it worked out. Again, it was a great learning experience in regards to commitment and dedication. And, I had my struggles just trying to understand the state rep, John Myers. But I can tell you that as I sit here today, I understand everything that he did. Whether or not I agree with his approach, I do understand everything that John did. And I think that helped to mold me. And there's things I look at and I say, oh, man, I won't do that. I think John's crazy. But there's so many other things that John did, and I can appreciate and respect it even greater tenfold now than, once you're going through it.
Yeah.
Yeah. John Myers.
Because you served as his chief of staff, correct?
I served as John's chief of staff for 4 years.
Okay.
And, when I say John was training me to be the state rep, I remember talking to John about taking time off. And John said, you can't take time off. People need services 24/7, every single day of the week. And throughout the 4 years that I worked for John, I took 1 week off. And he still called me that
Yeah.
1 week that I took off. And then after that, the 5th year is when he decided that he was going to retire. And, in accordance to the law, I could not work for the state and run for the seat. So I had to resign from my seat and became a candidate for this race. So the rest is history.
Yeah. Well, if you think of any other stories in the meantime, feel free to interject as you think of them.
Sure.
But moving on to your involvement with the Black Caucus, you served as chair for last session 2019, correct?
That's correct. Do you know when I first came here, though, I served as secretary my freshman year?
I did not, but I'm going to mark it down and write it on our information.
Yeah. So 2013, and this is really another interesting story as well. The senator, why can't I'm seeing her, but I can't think of her name.
Shirley Kitchen?
No, not Shirley Kitchen.
I'm trying to think of names.
Art Hayward is in her seat right now.
Roxanne Jones?
No, not Roxanne Jones.
I'm going through them.
Washington, Leanna
Washington.
Washington. Yeah, you were going there. You were going in order.
gonna get
You were
there.
getting there. I could see her. I just couldn't think of her name offhand because it's been a while since I've spoken to her. But Leanna Washington was very good friends with John Myers, and even though John Myers had retired, I had built a relationship by working with John Myers with the senator's office. And so when I got up here, the senator approached me and she said, "Hey, what do you know about the Black Caucus?" And I said, "Well, I know a little bit about it. When I was a staffer, I knew some of the previous chairs of the Black Caucus. Went on one of the summers we went to, not a retreat, but we went to like a forum that the Pennsylvania State Legislative Black Caucus was hosting. And Jewel Williams, I believe, at the time was the chairman of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus. And as a staffer, I went there with John to one of the forums. And in fact, it was in Arkansas. It's the first time I've been to Arkansas. And so I went there, as a staffer. So I knew about the state legislators, the Black Caucus, state legislators, and knew a little bit about it up here. But I wasn't a member, so I wasn't actively engaged. But getting up here, Senator Washington had talked about me running for a seat, the Black Caucus, which was like, wow, I was honored. Like, I'm coming in as a freshman, and you're telling me I should run for an office in the Black Caucus, and so I did. I ran for the position of secretary, and I believe that Vanessa Brown, I think, was the chair at that time when I came up here, and so I served as secretary for my freshman year as an officer of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus, and it was an interesting experience. You start really recognizing the largeness of Pennsylvania. It's not just Philadelphia and the surrounding counties. You start recognizing that there's 67 counties, and each county was unique in its own way, and as a member of the Black Caucus, we're made aware. We tried to educate folks on legislation, especially as it impacted people of color. When issues came up, we tried to assist and support from a caucus standpoint. So it was a true learning experience, and just something totally different for me. I was president of the Black Student Union in college. But when you get to this level, it's a whole different ball game that you're serving in as a black legislator, especially as a member of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus. And I can tell you this, that coming in from a freshman to sitting here today, I've seen the Black Caucus evolve. And what I mean by evolve is that I've seen us take on more issues in other counties. Now, it wasn't just, even though the majority of the members come from Philadelphia County, we started having conversations about Allegheny County. We started having conversations about York County, Berks County. All these other counties throughout that, many of us did not even know exist, let alone how many black people were in those particular counties. Especially when you come up here as a member and you see, the majority party, which had no black representation, at least sitting in the chamber at the time. It was just interesting. but yet, to address the issues, the concerns that folks were having, again, it goes back to that bridge building that I talked about, because I can't go in Somerset County and think I'm going to save those folks there, but you try to build a bridge to talk to the rep there, and you speak on behalf, I think as a member of the Black Caucus, you speak on behalf of the minority population that they had there. Yeah. Same with Lancaster County. I mean, I did not realize, again, looking at the diversity of this Commonwealth and the 67 counties, it's a large state, and we have pockets of folks of color in these counties. Some counties I still have not been to today, but I think that it's important that we, as the Black Caucus, still work across the aisle, work with our colleagues, and do our outreach to try to educate and assist folks throughout the Commonwealth. And that really extends beyond, the Black Caucus was developed to really support minorities, but I think that as times have changed, you find mixed race folks and just folks who just need help, and you just don't turn away because of the color of the skin. It may not be a black issue, but it can have, down the road, it can have impact on the community at large. And if we're in a position to try to help, that's what we try to do. And I can tell you that, it transitioned to me becoming the chair of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus last session. And I can tell you that I believe for the first time we actively had non-black members. Not just by word of mouth, but we actually had non-black members who attended our meetings. And these are members whose arms weren't twisted. It was just a gesture and an offer put out there. Many of them had black communities within the legislative district, and they wanted to be helpful, and they wanted to show their constituency that they too can build bridges. And I can tell you, as the chairman of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus, one of the things that I've done was to work with other caucuses and committees to have hearings in other communities. We did it up in the Lehigh County, having hearings up there, and so as we started having hearings, it wasn't just the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus. It might have been the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus and the Health Committee, focusing on inequities in health. It might have been the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus and the Education Committee. So we partner with various committees because, if we're going to make a change, listen, politics is also about numbers. I talk about being about relationships, but it's about numbers too. When we're up here on the House floor and we vote, there's a majority number and a minority number. And what I mean by that is that, when we try to pass legislation, you got to get over 103. If every black member or member of color voted up here on the House floor, okay, we get 20 some odd votes. That's still not enough to pass legislation. If every black member and Democrat voted, okay, we get 92 or so votes. It's still not enough votes to pass legislation. We got to reach across the aisle. If we're serious about the work we're doing and we want to pass legislation, we have to reach across the aisle and get Republicans who are non-black to recognize the importance of any work that we're doing and get them to vote with us. And that's how we get these numbers. So, you recognize that if there was a way for us to grow the membership, that's what I looked at. And one way to grow it, really the only way to grow it, was to allow non-black members to join. And okay. So, I think we had a robust, and these members were engaged. They weren't just, on a piece of paper saying, I'm here. They showed up at the meetings. They worked with us.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Is there any specific issues that you did tackle besides the ones you mentioned? Any specific legislation that you would like to mention?
I can tell you that I think one of the most impactful things that we did while I was the chair of the Black Caucus, and understand it's just because I had the title of the chair, each of us have a platform. I'm saying every single member, all 203 of us can use the podium to push forth something. The key is when you're able to come together to push forth something and the impact that it has. And I can tell you that there's a period of time when I was the chair and the Black Caucus sort of led the charge to take over the rostrum because there was no real gun reform, police reform, and we've talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. behind the scene, I can tell you the phone calls that were made, and ooh, that's pretty radical. I mean, what's going to be, what's going to be the outcome? But members stood together, and we saw that through the lead of the Black Caucus, we took over the rostrum. It's one thing to take over the rostrum, but the outcome, it forced the speaker at that time, was Terzai, to negotiate with us, and we worked with the governor's office, and out of that we were able to take, I think it was 4 pieces of legislation, it might have been 5, but we were able to condense some police reform legislation, and we came out with 2 bills that the governor signed. And I can tell you that in my time up here, I've never seen anything happen so quickly. But it all happened within a 2 to 3 week period, which we took over the rostrum, met with the speaker, kept the governor's office involved, and within 3 weeks got a piece of legislation on the House floor, voted on, House and Senate, governor signed it, and never seen anything like that before.
Wow. Yeah. We were watching that day that you took over the rostrum.
Yeah,
it was. Summer Lee donated the poster.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah,
the poster in our collection.
Yeah.
But are there any issues you think the Black Caucus should tackle in the future?
I think that there are things that we're working on right now, and we just got to find a way to ensure that, again, that all Pennsylvanians understand it. Again, 67 counties, health inequities. It's not just black people. It's poor people. It's rural folks who just don't have access to, hospitals like, the urban communities do. But health inequities is a major thing, and this impacts everybody, regardless of age, regardless of race, regardless of income level. Health. So it's something, and I currently serve as subcommittee chair of the Health Inequities Committee. But that's an issue. In certain pockets of Pennsylvania, primarily, namely, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, or Allegheny counties, I should say, there's been a rise of gun shootings. You have some of the same things with Reading and York County as well, but we need to find a way to allow the local municipalities to address their concerns and issues, and stop hiding behind the badge of the First Amendment, saying that we're trying to change the First Amendment. We're not. We're just trying to save lives. And so that's what that I think the Black Caucus need to continue to focus on. Education's always an issue, and again, it impacts everybody. You want, as a parent, you want to see your sons and your daughters do better than you are, and one of the ways that we can help that is through education. And I can tell you that the Black Caucus has been working with primarily the Democratic Caucus as well as the governor's office, and when the governor gave his budget, he talked about his continued increase in funding basic education. These are all areas that I believe will not only help people of color, but also help people of Pennsylvania to grow together. You don't want to have the haves and the have-nots, but we have it. It exists. But how do we level that field? What are we doing as legislators to level it and ensure that folks can have the best life that they so choose? So those are the areas that I think that we, I can talk about environmental injustice. I can talk about the digital world of broadband. These are all things that we're wrestling with right now. But I think that for people of color, public safety is definitely an issue. Healthy communities, I can talk about food insecurities, but that can fall under healthy communities as well. And I just think that we have an obligation to do everything that we can to try to help every single Pennsylvania. Again, I serve as the Black Caucus, but even within my family, everybody in my family is not. There's mixture in my family, so I can't just go to little Greg and say, "Hey, man, come on, we got to do this for the black people." His mother's not black. We got to do it for our families and future generations. And again, just keep in mind that I respect all religious backgrounds, all ethical backgrounds, but how do we mix it all together and move forward? With a common goal. Yeah. And I think that part of our role as members, whether the Black Caucus or as legislators, is that we need to do everything we can to educate our communities, to make our communities safer, to make our communities more engaged, and make our communities healthier. And that's part of the vision that I hope to see us continue to work on.
Yeah. One final question, unless you'd like to add anything else. Do you talk to any other former members outside of the Black Caucus, or maybe former members of the Black Caucus? Like I showed you this picture.
Sure.
Does anything spark your memory with looking at that picture or anything else?
Well, I can tell you that I talk with Congressman Dwight Evans quite often.
Okay.
Dwight Evans is another Germantown High School graduate.
Mm-hmm.
So, you have, I think, as far as I know, you have Dwight Evans, John Myers. Do you want me to close that?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
No.
We have Dwight Evans, John Myers, Dave Richardson, and Stephen Kinsey. We all came from the same high school.
Okay.
I think when I look at this, I think that Dave and John, I think Dave was the oldest, John was right after him. Then you had Dwight, and then you had me. And in essence, Dave was in office, Dwight was in office, then Dave unfortunately passed, and then you had John. So, you had John, you had David P. Richardson and Dwight Evans serve at the same time. Then you had John Myers and Dwight Evans serve at the same time. Then you had Steve Kinsey and Dwight Evans serve at the same time. So Dwight has seen all of us and worked with all of us. Ron Waters is someone who I see pretty regularly in the city of Philadelphia, former chairman of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus. Every now and then I see Senator Washington. I think she served as vice chair actually when I was here. She wasn't chair. I think she was vice chair. But I've seen her on occasions. And Vanessa Brown, Chairwoman Vanessa Brown, who left this legislature just maybe about the past maybe 5 years or so, 4 or 5 years ago. I see her regularly as well. So, it's interesting. And the first thing that we do anytime you see former legislators, like, how are you doing? I mean, that's first and foremost, how are you doing? We don't talk specifically about the Black Caucus, but we do talk about this house up here, in the legislature, and how things are going from that perspective. But I can tell you that in my conversations, even with non-presidents or former members, there's a great deal of admiration and respect that I garner that the members have, and I say that because they too have not only witnessed, but they've gone through the struggle of being a black legislator in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. And again, folks on the outside might look and say, oh, you're a legislator, or you're a lawmaker. But there are struggles that I believe occur simply because of the fact that we are black lawmakers. Most folks may not necessarily know the number of legislators that are here, and they just see a black face and say, hey, you're my legislator, go get them, we need some money. They don't know the process behind the scene in regards to what takes place. And so I think it's important that we educate, but the important thing is that black legislators definitely have to work together, and we have to find ways to continue to work and build bridges with other folks as well. One thing I do want to note is this, though. There was a gentleman, I talked about how there were no black Republican members.
Yes.
During my duration here, there was one, Harry Lewis. And so, I just want to share this story because Harry became a member of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus as well during his tenure here. And you hear about this guy who's running from Coatesville, and he's a black guy running as Republican. I'm like, what? Black guy running as Republican? Coatesville, I knew a little bit about Coatesville. I went to Westchester. But anyway, Harry Lewis gets elected. And as a black member, and you see this one black guy on the Republican side, you acknowledge, say hello, probably in your head saying, what are you doing up here, man? On that side, what are you sitting over there for? But I had a run-in with Harry Lewis in the cafeteria, in the Capitol cafeteria. And I was just getting something to eat, and Harry was on the side he was sitting down talking to some friends. And Harry Lewis says, hey, Rep. Kinsey. Surprised me, like, this guy knows my name. So I go over to him, I said, hey, Rep., how are you? He says, man, I'm great. And then he said something else to me. He said, Phi Noop. Now, common folks won't know what that means.
No.
It's a fraternity saying.
Okay.
And the only ones that say it are the ones who are part of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity. So I looked at him and thought, I didn't hear what, I know he didn't say what I thought he said. So I said, excuse me? And he said it again. And once he said that, I knew that Harry Lewis was my fraternity brother. So I went over and embraced him, and we did that fraternal handshake. And he says, hey, man, I'm so glad. He said, I heard great things about you. So glad to meet you. And I said, hey, man, welcome to the halls of the house. And I said, anything I can do to assist you, let me know. And those were sincere words. And I can tell you that during the duration of Representative Lewis' time here, we've worked on some things together. I think we sponsored a couple pieces of legislation. But he and I would always host Kappas on a Capitol Day. So we would bring up the fraternity members up here. And it was a great thing. And then we started doing some additional stuff. We partnered to bring up the Tuskegee Airmen, the first group of African American men to serve in the Air Force. Well, in the Air Force at the time, I guess it was called. And so it was great to partner, and that goes back to that bridge I talked about building. To build it with Harry was simply easier because, one, he was black, but then more importantly, he was my fraternity brother. So there was something in common. I miss Harry Lewis. I've spoken to him since he's left here, but, he's a great guy, and, we just need more of that no matter what side of the aisle that you're on. We just need folks who are coming up here to represent. And I'd love to see a growth of people of color continue to come here, and the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus continue to open up and expand, so that way we can show the true diversity without losing the focus of why the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus was started. Yeah. And, I hope to see more of that before, my tenure here is done.
Yeah. Those conclude my questions. Is there anything else you'd like to add or mention before we stop?
No, I think that, you covered all in, and this year in and of itself, we've seen a growth of additional diversity, Dominican, Latino, of course, Patty Kim, whose agent came in with me, and they're all members of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus, and I think that it's important that we continue to grow the Black Caucus, so folks can understand the importance, the historic perspective of why this organization was started when it was started. But more importantly, it's like keeping that dream alive. These men and women who started the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus, they did it because they saw a need, and part of that need was they recognized that their constituency, black people, weren't being served in regards to the type of services that they needed. They didn't just start it because, hey, we're all black, let's just do this like a club. No, they recognized that no matter what part of the state that they were from, they all recognized the same thing, and that was that a feeling that minority communities were being left out. And I think it's important that the PLBC continues to bang the drum and let folks know that if we're going to have a healthy Pennsylvania, then it has to be an inclusive Pennsylvania. And the PLBC will do its part to ensure the inclusion of black folks. So, I applaud the Black Caucus. I'm truly happy that I was able to serve as a past chairman of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus, and I'm going to continue to work with them as long as I'm here. The challenges, we can talk about challenges of the past, but there are many challenges that lie ahead, and we just have to be prepared for it.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm going to stop this.